I'd like to call to order this workshop. This will be a more informal session. We don't take audience input, but we may ask a few of our guests to come forward to, if the board has some questions we feel you can share with us. So I am going to turn it over to the superintendent to introduce our first guests at the table.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I'm fighting a cold here, so you might hear that. But I'm just going to give a little bit of background and then turn it over to our guests. Earlier this school year, the board will remember that we brought forward an MOU that Portland Police and Portland Public Schools was working together on. And Portland Police asked us to be looking at that and considering that. When we looked at it as a board, we really didn't get into depth about the MOU itself. What we talked about was the dollars and cents of it and the reality that we budget for a school year last year. So to spend money this year was a little difficult. With that said, I followed up with Captain Hager, who's here, and I'll introduce in a minute. She was very understanding of that and said totally get it, but would the board be willing to have a conversation with the MOU? Let's not even talk money right now. At which point, we've talked, nothing formally as a board, but we talked about how do we address this MOU? What's the conversation look like? And I think one of the first things this board said, or a couple individuals of the board said, well, can we have Portland Police Division come so we can learn about the youth division, so we can learn about SROs, which is ultimately what this workshop is about. It's really to learn about the partnership, to learn about what youth divisions do, what the support is, and then specifically we have two of our SROs here as well that we can get into and have conversations about what we do day to day. What does this partnership look like? So again, this is learning. There's no action, there's no vote, there's nothing to quote unquote to be considering tonight. It's more about what is our active partnership. You will notice there's a number of administrators in the audience as well. As Frida said, in our workshops, it's up to the board, but if we want to have more of a conversation base anytime tonight and ask administrators for input, we can do that as well. But ultimately tonight, I believe, as I get the privilege of introducing Captain Tasha Hager, who's the Youth Division Captain. Is that accurate? Is the title? Okay. And in our phone conversations, I shared, I hope this sounds familiar, would you be willing to come to a workshop and share with our board? And she graciously said, tell me when and where, and I will be there. And then she's also invited two of our own, I like to call our own, I know they have Portland Police uniforms, but they're in our David Douglas district daily, and that's Officer Steve Mornville and Officer Chris Cole, who are both what I consider David Douglas family and David Douglas through and through, although I know they go to other districts as well. We allow that sometimes. So, but with that said, I think I'll turn the floor over to Captain Hager, and we can have a quick, or not quick, excuse me, we can have a little bit of a conversation and go from there.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here to chat about this. I think the first place that I want to start is really about where this all is coming from. So over the last couple of years, the Portland Police Bureau has really tried to take steps forward in the work we're doing, specifically outside of the realm of strictly law enforcement. We've done a tremendous work around mental health, and we have had SROs in schools for at least the last 17 years, maybe it could be about 20, since 2001, so 17 years. And I think that over the last couple years, the movement has really been to make that unit a very professional unit and cutting edge and meeting some of the national standards, national best practice standards. And so that goes into many different things. A big piece of that was training, but another piece of that was having an IGA or an MOU between the school districts we were serving and the Portland Police Bureau, which for almost every organization is a pretty standard thing, and really is surprising that we haven't done this many years ago. You know, the idea of the IGA really is to put on paper the expectations and the roles of both the school district and the police bureau, and to enshrine in that IGA, or ideology, or what we're looking for in having SROs in schools. So that was the impetus to begin the conversation about the IGA. And then the other piece of that came along with it was funding. The Bureau is going through a significant budget crisis, but we're also going through a significant personnel crisis. So as the captain of the Youth Services Division, one of my goals was to guarantee my staffing. And really the only way to guarantee my staffing was to guarantee in writing that the Police Bureau would provide schools a certain level of staffing. And that would mean in the future, regardless of what the Police Bureau comes up against, whether budget or personnel, which actually personnel is one of our more pressing issues, SROs would still be assigned to the schools. So that was the drive behind this conversation. And I think, this was a little bit previous to me, so I'm kind of going back before I took over as the captain of Youth Services. I actually picked this ball up kind of midway through, but the conversations at the beginning started with the Portland Public School System. Actually, I think there was some reaching out a little bit, but it initially started with the Portland Public School System, and I just want to clarify, it wasn't about it was that there had to be a place to start, and starting in all three school districts, which really we serve. We have SROs assigned to Portland Public Schools, David Douglas, and Park Rose. Riverdale we also serve, and they love an SRO, but they don't have one that's dedicated to them right now. Was really just about not being overwhelmed, because even at the current staffing levels, and just to give you a little bit of an idea, the authorized strength for the SROs is 12. So there are 12. I should have 12. Right now I only have 10. And 9 of those are assigned to Portland Public School Systems. 2 of them are assigned here, and then 1 has been assigned to Park Rose. And it's been that way for quite some time. I don't know how long it's been that way. Long time? And when I look for a history piece, I'm going to look to him and him, but they've both been here way longer than I have. So that is our authorized strength. But just to give you some idea, when the Portland Police Bureau took over policing or providing police services to the school systems directly, PPS had their own police department, and then they decided to eliminate that. And at the time, I believe there were 22 officers working in the Portland Public School System that we absorbed. So you can see the we've already had a huge impact in YSD and in the SRO program because of budget and personnel, and it's just been a slow attrition to some of our specialty units. 12 is really the minimum for us to run, and running at 10 has become a challenge to actually provide the service we want. I don't want to. If anybody has any questions, because I could talk for the next hour, and you'll be like, when is she going to stop talking? I could really probably do that. So if you have something, just let me know. I think there is a complete misperception, at least publicly, about the function of the SRO and what a school resource officer is and what they do. Because they're a police officer, people want to go directly towards the main function of law enforcement, which is to enforce the laws. But the reality is that SROs spend very little amount of their time actually performing law enforcement functions. And quite often, when they end up in a position where there is a potential for a law violation, it doesn't end up in the criminal justice system. And that's really because the philosophy on SROs nationwide has changed, and that you can see that in the training, which our SROs are basic and advanced certified through NASRO, which is the National Organization of School Resource Officers, has really targeted putting the right people in schools and then giving them the training to work with youth. The reality is youth think differently than adults. Their brains are not fully developed. I don't say fully developed because some might not like that, but they are developing at the time they're in school, and so sometimes their thought processes are not the same as adults. And when you're a police officer and you're doing a job, you're doing the regular work, and you're typically dealing with adults, it's easy to forget that youth don't think the same, and they're not always conscientious of the consequences of their actions. And I'm not sure. I'm not gonna guess anybody's age, but I'll just say that when I was young, we could get into trouble in school, and that trouble didn't land us with an arrest, or I might have gotten grounded, or I might have actually, back then there were spankings still. So there were other consequences, but those consequences weren't always in the justice system. And what I will tell you, because one of the things that I hear quite often is having police in our schools is going to lead to more kids in jail. And what I will tell you is the exact opposite is true. Because our SROs have, because they have the training and they have access to resources that our patrol officers do not have. We have in our office Cheryl. She works for Multnomah County, and she is, I can't remember her full title, I'm going to say resource specialist, but it's a lot longer than that. But she's basically a resource specialist. And she works out of her office 40 hours a week with the SROs in the job that they do, specifically to deal with issues with youth before they enter the criminal justice system. In fact, if there is a criminal report that's written, then they're past her already. So she won't deal with people who are already going into the system. So the idea for the SROs is to use those resources for youth prior to them entering the system, and I think that our arrest record last year reflects that. I mean, our SROs made total. Let me give you total, and because numbers. I'll throw out these numbers, and the number everybody probably has heard because it's been reported is 13, and that's specifically a PPS number. But our SROs made 20 arrests inside of Portland schools they served last year, total. Total for the whole police bureau was 28. So even if you include our uniformed police officers, the number doesn't go up dramatically. But the big thing is our uniformed police officers are typically only working Mondays, and our SROs cover the rest of the week. So and then I also want to be clear on what an arrest means for a youth. Sometimes it is going to mean what you would typically think of as an arrest, which means they get put in handcuffs and they get taken to JDH, and they are lodged into JDH until JDH can determine, whether they're going to be released or if they have to go to court. But just as typical for a youth is the arrest is simply on paper. They never end up in handcuffs. They don't go anywhere. And when it's at school, it's depending on the school administrator and the conversation with the SRO as to whether the student is allowed to return to class or if they're sent home with a parent. So the concept of what an arrest means for a youth is often different than what people are envisioning when they think of it. So that's a big a big portion. That restorative justice piece is a big portion of what our SROs are trained on and how they operate. And not to minimize our patrol officers, but the one thing, and I'm just going into all the questions I've been asked and answering them, so feel free to. One of the things I've been asked is, well, if we don't have SROs, then do we still get police service? Yes, you do. Everybody in the city of Portland gets police service from the Portland Police Bureau. The difference is, for schools, is the difference between an SRO performing that police service and one of our patrol officers. And it's important to understand that our patrol officers are impacted by a couple of things. Number one, they don't have the training. They have some training, but it's a lot less. They don't have immediate access to resources. They don't have the relationships that our SROs have. They don't have relationships with the county. They don't have relationships with DHS. They don't have those relationships because they don't have the time to build them. And then time is a big factor. So when that SRO or when the uniformed patrol officer shows up at a call, they still have 3 to 5 to 10 calls waiting for them after that one. So their goal is to find a resolution and enact the resolution and move on to the next call because everybody wants a piece of their time. And, you know, the reality is for our SROs, if you have when it comes to how that impacts crime, there are things, for example, when we did some student outreach, I asked a group of students, so how many people would say if you're at lunch with your friends and two of you get into an argument and one of you hits another student, is that a crime? Well, no. I mean, I got a lot of no's from, we're talking high school kids, and the answer is yes. That's a crime. It's called assault. It may not mean that it's a crime that you're going to get arrested for, but if I walked up to any other person right now and punched them, it would be an assault. So it just, to me, that was a very real clarity that they don't necessarily always see things the way that the rest of the world sees them. And I think that's the benefit of having an SRO there because they have the time to dig down into why. Where a patrol officer just says, well, if that kid punched that kid, then that kid's under arrest, and here we go. And like, again, I said, arrest doesn't mean in handcuffs on paper, and on paper that goes off to JDH, and they can decide to dismiss the charges that they want, but that's going to be on that use record. Where the SROs can dig down and they can find out, well, one kid made eyes at the other kid's girlfriend and he didn't like it, and they're really actually their friends and nobody wants to press charges, and then there's conversations that occur after that. So there's, but that takes time to work through. I could keep going. Anybody? I'll stop for a second and ask. Anybody have any questions? Because sometimes it's easier to.
Is there any questions right now? You got one, Andrew?
Yeah, I have several.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's see. So, well, one, I really appreciate you all coming this evening and taking time to share all of this information. It's really helpful for us to hear. I have a question kind of on what you had just been referring to in terms of the percentage of when the law is being enforced and when folks are actually arrested. And I'm just curious, what is the actual percentage in David Douglas of those arrests that are on paper versus the arrests that are not?
So what do you mean on arrests that are on paper?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit earlier about arrests and students usually going through the normal process of JDH. What's the percentage of those versus the ones that you said are just on paper?
How many times have you handcuffed somebody this year?
So, we talked about last school year. I physically arrested with handcuffs on property 2 students. Both of those arrests were with administration present. The conversation that was had was with them. Both of those scenarios generated initially outside of school, but the school became involved because of what occurred. And they were kind of at the top extreme in what we do, right? The criminal aspect of it was pretty extreme. But I have not made any of those or even paper arrests without an administrator present. It's all been.
And what's the percentage, like, date, is that, like, I'd be curious to see not just last year, but in previous years? Is that available for us to review?
Previous years? So I know that I can't tell you what the number is from the previous year, except to say that our arrests were down last year compared 2017, 2018 was lower than 2016, 2017. But I don't know what the number is, but it is something that I can get for you. Yeah.
Stephanie?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand the numbers when you
Right.
when you came to arrests, and you said that that there were 28 overall of all officers that made arrests in schools in the entire Portland area.
Yep.
28, and 20 were made by SROs.
20.
So that means 8 were made by
20
street
20
cops.
right. 20 were
Okay.
made by SROs, and 13 of those 20 were in PPS schools. Now, I
Okay.
tried to call the person who was going to give me the number in David Douglas, but we did it by hand, so we didn't do it with our data people. But it's less than 7. So that's all the rest of the schools. And I think it's important to understand that we don't, even though our SROs are assigned to specific schools, we serve all schools. So every private school, every alternative school, it doesn't matter what the school, some schools that you wouldn't even actually think are schools, but are technically, I mean, they're technically a school. So if they're flagged as a school in our system, then our SROs will go to them.
That would include Rosemary Anderson, that would include Serendipity,
Okay.
that would include all of those as well.
I'm just trying to understand this 28 number, because you said there were 20 that were arrests made at all those schools by SROs, and
SROs,
another
yeah.
8 that were made above and beyond that are
By
those
other
Monday
officers.
officers.
By other officers.
So to me, it seems like the statistics would show that SROs are less likely to arrest than street cops, considering SROs are on duty 4 days a week,
Yes.
and Mondays are Portland Police.
Yes.
Okay.
So what I'll say about that number, the number of arrests are so low that to draw any statistical analysis from them, anything, is anybody who does data will tell you cannot draw any
Yeah,
conclusions
right.
based on that low of a number. I do know, and I'll say this, but I can't reproduce it. I know that at one point in time, JDH actually did an analysis of arrests, and they determined that arrests were higher on Monday. I've asked them to give me that, and the person who did that data isn't available anymore. But I would say, just from an anecdotal and reasonable, I mean, just having been in this job for 25 years, arrests will go up if it is a patrol officer coming. Even if it's just a paper arrest, it will go up because they won't take the time to sort things out and have all the conversations. If you're, as an administrator,
Yeah,
are calling and you're saying, this person is a victim of crime and this person is the perpetrator of the crime, they'll do enough of an interview to determine, yep, that crime happened, and they will let the sorting out happen at a different level. It would be great to say that we could make that not happen, but in reality, they don't have time to spend, an hour or 2 hours on some of these calls. And so the SROs are just a better resource when it comes to keeping kids out of the criminal justice system. And I know I have a whole bunch of administrators sitting behind me, so I hope I don't take any shots. But the reality is that in a school system, there are some students who can be very frustrating for teachers and administrators within the school system, and sometimes there is an expectation that law enforcement button is going to resolve that issue. And part of the importance of having that relationship between the SRO and the administrators is so that the SROs can push back and say, this needs to be handled within the school system and maybe within the disciplinary system, not within the criminal justice system. I won't say that it happens here, but I know that it has happened because there are a lot of things that hit that criminal button, but are also maybe not worth going down that path. Sometimes it's better to look at other options, and that's what our SROs do. And it's really that partnership piece between the SRO and the administrator to really have that conversation about is it worth taking this outside of the school's authority and moving it into the criminal justice system. And most of the time the answer to that is no. But that relationship won't exist between patrol and those administrators. So if somebody calls and says there's a crime that happened, the expectation is that you called the police because a crime happened, so they're going to write a report, and that's how they that's how they operate. The one other thing I will say is that when I talk about the system and keeping youth who don't belong in the system out of the system, I'm including ours. So we too have a data system, and many people will ask me about the opposite side. Well, how many times do your SROs not arrest someone? Well, I don't know, because we don't keep track of it, because the idea is to not have youth in the system. Once they write the report, the youth is in the system. So if they were to write a report and then say, but I didn't make an arrest just so we could count it, they're defeating the purpose of why they're there, which is to not have them in the system.
I do wonder, though, with the passage of Senate or House Bill 2355, the end profiling bill that passed in 2017, which requires mandatory data collection on any officer-initiated stop, whether it's in a car or pedestrian, how that data is being captured with SROs.
I guess I would have to look at that a little. If it's about a self-initiated, then a call wouldn't. That wouldn't include a call.
Right, but just initiating a conversation with a pedestrian, whether that's a youth or an adult, does now require by law that some information is taken around demographics. So I'm just wondering how SROs are trained in that.
And that requires if you're doing a stop. So if you're a conversation
Right.
talking to them, isn't it? So if we're stopping somebody, that means we're actually...
Yeah, if it's officer initiated, yes. Okay.
In this case, we would probably write something up, because if it's a point where you're not free to go, we're not letting you go, and it's not a school issue, we would probably end up writing a report on that because of doing that, in which case it would be documented. So I don't know a specific instance that you might be thinking of, but if it's an actual stop that would require that, it would probably require us writing a report.
I think inclusion of pedestrian stops wasn't like an arrest or you're not free to go. It's officer-initiated contact was the intent of the bill, to understand, kind of like originally to understand were certain demographics, questioned, why are you here, racially. So it's just a question like how that's being, have the SROs been tracking that? I understand you don't want specific students right in the system or names, but is any of that information captured?
So this is what I would say. If I had to make them give me that information every time they said hi to a student walking down the hall, they would never get anywhere. And I think what you're talking about is about an officer-initiated stop, so a pedestrian stop or a traffic stop. They don't typically do pedestrian stops and traffic stops. And I will have to read the bill to know if that would apply, but I don't think it does, to responding to a radio call. So when the administrator calls and says, hey, I have this, can you come deal with it? You're not initiating that. It's being initiated in a different way. So if they do a traffic stop or a subject stop, that implies that they have probable cause to make that stop, or reasonable suspicion to make that stop, and then they do have to document it. But I would say, and I don't know, I'll let you speak for yourself, I would say most of the conversations they're having with students on a day-to-day, just in the schools, is more, hey, how's it going? Not, I need to talk to you, stop, if that makes sense.
Stephanie, just so you know, I talked to John Byer prior, and he apologized. He had to go to a basketball game. But him and I discussed the fact that so many students avoid the justice system through the restorative justice and the SROs working with the students and the families. So I requested that he maybe start collecting that data, because it appears you can't collect it in through your system, but it would be easier for us to collect it at our end for the ones that we have avoided having go into the system.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I do think that there is in one of the challenges in we have a certain some of the stuff that we're referring to Multnomah County in Multnomah County's restorative justice program is tracked through Multnomah County. And I'm working with them to provide that data back to me, because we don't actually collect it, they collect it. But there is a certain amount of things that happen in the school system where the officer might be involved, but then it's no longer actually dealt with. And if the schools were tracking that, that would be very valuable to know at the end what that looked like.
Okay. Any other questions, Donna? At this time, we're going to be having more conversations, so if you don't yet.
Just a couple of things. I wondered, you mentioned the training. Does the training include something on implicit bias?
So all Portland Police Bureau members get implicit bias training. Mm-hmm. Actually, we're getting a 3-part series. We've had 2 parts, and I believe or did we just have the third this last?
That was the second.
That was the second. There's one more. And that goes to all Bureau members. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anything specific in the NASRO training. No. So that particular issue crosses all boundaries, so it's something that we give to every officer, not just SROs.
Okay, and there's no special applications for the school environment?
I would say the things that we learn, the things that we're learning in the class itself would apply to youth as well as adults.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My other question is, do the officers have any other connections with the community? Well, one, are officers assigned in communities where they reside? But either way, are there other connections? And of course, I'm mainly saying positive connections and opportunities for positive connections outside of conflict that happens in school for officers to build relationships with students and families and community.
Absolutely. Either one of you want to talk about that?
So the outside of conflict, I would say conflict is a very small percentage of what we do on a daily basis. Most days there is no conflict. Steve and I teach different classes. We teach part of a health class at Floyd Light. We teach a technology class here, digital literacy. And those are very engaging and funny and interesting, the questions that come up. The conflict portion of the SRO job it's almost non-existent, to be honest with you. And when it does become a conflict, it's right at the end. It's funny, I wish more people could see us interact with them, like with a dean or however this is going. It's much more of just a conversation, and I always start out with, hey, I don't know you, I don't know who you are, I'm not mad at you, but this is the situation at hand, and we have to deal with it. The behavior is what the issue is, and it goes from there. And I don't think even through the bulk of those conversations there's any conflict, not between me being angry or the person we're talking to being angry with me. They may be angry with somebody else because there's a lot of personality conflict in what we deal with. Mm-hmm. But I never feel the conflict is there. It's just part of a process, if you will.
And when you're operating in those other roles, are you in uniform
Absolutely.
Or in plain clothes? So do they have opportunities, and I'm saying this could be outside of the school, right, to see you engaged with the community when you're out of uniform?
No, not in this community. No, I don't live out this way. Our office, in the morning respond to North Precinct at corner MLK and Killingsworth. I get dressed there, and then I drive out here to work.
Okay.
And I'll add to that.
Steve's the opposite.
Yeah. Do you want to answer?
We all go to MLK in Killingsworth. All SROs are based out of there, so we all come from there. SROs live all the way across the city. They're in different parts, so it's rare that you would actually live in the district where you're working. But we go all over the city. Our big engagement with the kids is being SROs. It is being here all the time. That is where we get it, building community. We meet them in their kindergarten classes. We go do safety patrol classes. We do community outreach. Here's your community workers, and we go in and talk to the little kids. Teaching the classes at the middle schools, the high schools. Year after year, seeing you, saying hi, giving them stickers, sitting at the table and eating lunch with them at the elementary school. And you build those relationships where they're comfortable with you. And in high school, one goes over and beats up the other one, and you pull them in. It's like, what's going on? Oh, yeah, sorry, Officer Steve. Well, I was at... And you have a conversation because they know you. They recognize you. You're not a scary police officer. You're just that guy that they've seen for the last 10 years. And that's the role of an SRO, is to be that community figure that's safe and comfortable, and we recognize you. And that's where we build it. That's our community with them, is that. They're our kids. We consider the David Douglas kids our kids. So we will look out for them. We worry about them. We're wondering what's going on in the community. And that's part of our connection with them. So when stuff does happen, we can have a conversation and not have to be this confrontational person. Had an issue last year where we had a kid bring a gun to school. We've known this kid for years. We've been working with him through middle school and through high school. Somebody that we've dealt with, and it very well could have turned into something really bad, really bad. But Chris knew him and ended up having a conversation at the end of it where we've had conversations. We've seen him since then. Give him a hug when you see him. Go talk to mom. We know mom. We've dealt with mom for years with all the different kids in the family. And you can just have conversations, and that's our role, is to be that liaison between the police and the schools and the kids and the parents, and try to coordinate with all of them to make the system work so kids can succeed.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions right now? I guess you can go on with if the officers would like to share also.
I'm available anytime. I'm pretty much honest to a fault. I will talk about anything, answer anything. If you ever want to give me a holler, please do. I'll come by if you have. I don't know if you guys have offices. I don't know how it works, but I'll swing by, talk to you about what's going on. I'm always available.
Yeah, I think if you guys want a true voice of what we do, it's them, it's you guys, it's the voice of the kids and the people that are out there. They're the ones that see us, and you'll get it from them. We can talk until we're blue in the face about numbers and statistics and what it is, but how do the kids feel with us in the schools? What does it make them feel like? What benefits do they get from it? Administrators, teachers, what is it that you're getting from them, and do you like having them or not? There's been a lot of stuff in the news, a lot of people that are upset about police being in schools and sharing the narrative that if police are in schools, there's only going to be more arrests, and this is what's going to happen. We need to get police out of schools. And the numbers say opposite of that, and us being in the schools and the relationships say opposite of that. So I think getting those voices are good. However you want to get them, whether it's through assemblies or school meetings or just talking to the kids and teachers. I think that's a huge part of this, is getting that narrative. Rather than 10 or 15 people telling you, what's the mass telling you? Because I think that's where you'll get your true voice.
I guess the last thing would be those in the Youth Services Division, the SROs, it's a job you have to apply for, right? It's not easy to get into. You have to have kind of some clean history, responsibilities and whatnot. We chose to want to do this and to go into the schools and work with administrators. Almost my entire family's school teachers to administrators, and want to work not only with the kids, but with another professional group of people, right? Being the administration. Patrol, I dare anybody in this room to walk to a patrolman and ask if he ever wants to respond to a school for a call, and they will run the opposite direction. So it's one of those things where we like doing this. We chose to do this. And to be honest with you, we're in a career field where like to be told what to do, right? We come up with the idea, we're going to move forward with it, but then you talk to the administrator, and they're like, well, I've got some background in this, student. They're struggling with a bunch of other things. Maybe we should go this direction. And you're like, okay, let's do that. And that's kind of how the whole thing works. It's not nearly like what patrol is with the call volume and the lack of time to complete things correctly. I think the time aspect of it is what really benefits us with being able to spend time with whatever topic or problem we're facing.
Which is our big hindrance right now.
Yeah.
We don't have time right now, which is the reason that our captain has pushed so hard for this. There was 4 of us today for the whole city, and I was acting sergeant during that time, so really only 3 SROs. So I drove down to Franklin, I drove up to Madison, I drove to down to Lane, and now I'm here. So even though I'm a David Douglas SRO, I was at nowhere around David Douglas all day. And so I've gotten no time to spend building those relationships with the kids anymore because of our cuts that have been coming down, our officers having to backfill patrol. We've lost that whole community building part that we've had over the last couple of years because of that. And that's one of the reasons that she's pushed so hard to get these agreements signed so we can be back in our school districts, in the schools, helping doing that. And that's where our hindrance has been. And
with that, it's been this like myth that we're here to patrol the school or we're here to patrol the students. That is not within our job title. We're not here to patrol the hallways. We're here to defend the hallways if it comes down to that, right? If there's an issue within the school or an issue outside the school. I think what gets lost in a lot of this, just at Madison High School a couple of weeks ago, probably one of the most dangerous people in this city, not a student, an adult, a multi-time felon, showed up at that school with a gun and tried to follow students into that school. That gets lost. That's what we're there for. That had nothing to do with the school outside that there were students there. And we brought it to an end, right? Peacefully, no violence other than him being put in handcuffs. But it's more than just being here to patrol students. That's not what we do. We do handle issues within the student population, primarily personality conflict, some theft, maybe some possession, photograph-based stuff that's not necessarily supposed to be on somebody's cell phone of somebody else. We deal with that kind of stuff, but it's not what we generated being here. It's what just generated out of this community being a community, right? It's just a community like any neighborhood is, and there's going to be issues that require law enforcement attention, and having somebody that's familiar and with time to help work through that, and try to get pictures off of other people's phones and going to that house to talk to the parents honestly and, not sugarcoating things all the time. Hey, your son is up to this or your daughter is doing this and we really need to have it stop, right? Things like that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I have a couple questions around just general, I guess the potential for use of force. And I think you talked a little bit about a particularly dangerous example at Madison, but I'm just kind of curious, what are some of the examples when you would need to use kind of force, or just thinking of some of the weapons that you all have, and I guess for me as a student, right, someone who probably was like more quiet, my ability to perhaps want to build a relationship probably would have been different if you are armed versus not armed. So just wondering what that looks like for you all, and kind of the reasoning and need for being armed in the work that you do in the schools.
Well, first of all, I'm a police officer, right? Yes, I'm at the school, but I may respond across the street to whatever is there. The Madison High School issue, there would be no other. I mean, you're dealing with a person with a gun. I don't think you go to that unarmed. I don't think anybody that is unarmed, that wouldn't be an issue for their campus monitors to deal with. That would be a situation where they acted perfectly. They locked in that school, they called the police, and we came and handled it. First and foremost, I'm still a police officer. I still have policies that guide me. Everything that I carry is by policy. I don't really have the ability to pick and choose within my job description, although I'd like to get rid of this ASP, which has been horrible for 22 and a half years. I think even if it starts a conversation, like why do you have that? It's a conversation, and then you explain it, and you let people in on the big secrets, I guess, and where the training goes. It's an inroads, right? I've had a lot of kids ask me about this or that probably wouldn't have asked anything otherwise, and now they come and talk to me all the time. Did you have a question about when I would use force? Was that part of the question?
Yeah, I think I was curious, but you answered it, and kind of responding sounds like more predominantly outside of school versus in school.
And again, I feel the bulk of my job is in defense of my community, right? I'm here for whatever might come here, whether it's a mental health issue or an addiction issue from the outside community coming through. There's a lot of folks that pass through all of our campuses on a daily basis that have nothing to do with the school. They're just pieces of the community that are a threat to the school at some point. Any more?
I wondered do you feel that you have, because you've spoken a lot about the relationship with the students, do you feel like you have sufficient engagement with parents?
So that's kind of built in. If I talk to somebody's student here for whatever issue it is, outside of hello, how you doing, good job, how are your grades? If I'm in a dean's office and we're having a conversation, there's a phone call made, no matter what. I mean, that's just what we have to do. So it's either if I can't get a hold of them on the phone, I go to the house and I contact them. Hey, this is me. This is my business card. This is what we discussed. I asked your student to please come home and have this conversation with you. It's better for your parents to hear it from you than from your dean. A lot of times we have folks that aren't responding to the certified mail. Steve and I will go deliver that and say, hey, this is pressing. Your student's in some real trouble here. You need to have that conversation with the school. I think maybe they're not giving you all the information. The unfortunate thing is those relationships with those parents and those students are the kids who have some other issue, right? The vast majority of our students we probably never see. They're just the students going about their business. We might get to see them at a sporting event saying hello to their parents, things like that. But yeah, if you're just the normal student being educated, going about your business and not having any issues, unless you say hello to us or I say hello to you in the hallway, yeah, it's hard to build those relationships.
So one of the challenges right now on that relationship piece, whether it's with students, parents, or administrators, that is resolved by the IGA is having the SROs go back to doing SRO duty full-time. So right now, each one of the SROs is required to spend one shift working backfill in a precinct in a district. So they work 4 days a week. So 1 day a week, if they're working the precinct, it means they're only in the school 3 days a week. Really, for us, just because of the low number, our SROs have worked Tuesday through Friday for a long time. And having the SROs not have to work backfill, which is part of how we structured the IGA, gives them 10 hours back in their schools and gives them way more time to do some of the relationship building. And I've talked to Steve about it quite a bit, and he's been here a long time. That 1 day is a huge deficit when it comes to the amount of time you get to spend doing some of the things, because they are busy. And, one of the, from our data from last year, there were almost 5,500 calls to all schools in the Portland area. That's a pretty large number of calls. SROs handled half of them. Patrol handled the other half. That includes calls 24/7. So and the school calls, and I know because I get a page every time one comes out, happen at all times of the evening and during the night when school is not in session. They don't go to those calls. Those are answered by our patrol officers. But that's a pretty the significant impact. Mostly for PPS and for David Douglas, means that you get at least one of your SROs working on Monday. For the two of them, one of them would have work Monday through Thursday, and the other would work Tuesday through Friday. So you would at least have one on each side of the week. And I think that is going to have, I think that will have an impact. I don't know exactly what the impact will look like on the data piece, because I know there's a couple people interested in data. We are looking at, with our strategic services, building some sort of public-facing data and really kind of breaking the schools out. At the same time, we need to be a little bit careful about how we do things specifically because our arrest numbers are so low. There are some schools where they've only had one arrest, and when you start talking about that as a data point and you start talking about and giving the information, everybody knows who you're talking about. So from our perspective, we need to be a little bit careful, but we can parse out some of the data, and we're working on that. It's not going to happen overnight, because I'll tell you, our strategic services division is, like every part of the police bureau, way overworked, and they're getting a lot of data requests. But that is one of the benefits. One of the other things that I'll touch on before I go back to questions too is the safety piece. And it's an uncomfortable topic to talk about the dangers that face our country right now when it comes to things like active shooters. And we want to think that it won't happen here. But it already has happened here in our area, in a school, in a mall, and it can happen again. And even though it is one of the, we call them high incident high impact but low incident occurrences, those are the things that having our SROs in schools, hopefully we can get in front of before it even gets to that point. But if it were to ever get to that point, I would so much, if I had a student in any of our Portland schools, I would want one of them standing somewhere in the hallway, because that's what's going to make things go better. But even if you look at that and say that could not happen, it could happen next year, it could not happen for the next 5 years, and that's absolutely accurate. When you look at some of the things that you may be aware of because of your position either on the board. I'm sure your administrators are aware of them, but there are things that are happening in our schools, and I don't necessarily know David Douglas to what extent it's happened here, that people aren't aware of, because we don't publish these things in the Oregonian. We don't call the Oregonian and say, hey, guess what? We just took a gun off a kid in school, and we might have saved somebody else from there being a violent interaction. We don't talk about it, and we don't talk about it really for one reason, because as a department, our responsibility isn't just to reduce crime, it's to reduce the fear of crime. So fear reduction is a balance. So educating and making sure people understand what's happening versus laying out everything, there's a balance. There's a balance to that. And I have heard, on a couple occasions, people have told me, well, we don't see anything happen. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's like assuming that because you never see kids drink that they're not drinking. But you know they are. So preparing for that, or combating that, or educating that you don't stop doing those things just because you don't see it happening. You still address those things because you know that they either are happening or can happen. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about that particular aspect, but there is a level of security, and it would be one of the reasons why our officers will be armed. Because there is an expectation, and I would say that every single one of them would put themselves in harm's way to save the kids that are in their schools. And particularly for David Douglas, you guys, your two SROs have been here the longest. So of any of the SROs that are working in any of our schools right now. And so there's some real there's a lot of buy-in from them on the school safety and on the school environment and how they fit into that school scheme.
Is there any questions on this side, Stephanie?
As I'm trying to think back, this is a question I think for Pat and Ken about what the FTE are in our budget for SROs. I know they're not in our budget; they're officially like intergovernmental agreements. But is it, because I thought I remembered it being 2 FTE?
We don't pay for the SROs at this point,
No, we
so there's
don't,
nothing in our budget.
But is that?
And that's
What-
part of
that's
what
what we
she's
were
saying.
asked, or-
That's part of what she's saying right now is that she can't guarantee us a number because we don't pay for it. So we're a little bit at the whim of the needs of the city. Is that?
But there's got to be some way to manage time, right? So we have to know how much time I'm trying to figure out, like, what is your overall budget, right? I'd love to see that for all our SROs that serve all the schools. And I know it's public info.
3 million.
Yeah, email me.
Yeah.
And then, like, what percentage of that time Douglas is actually getting, just to get a sense of, like, what we're, even though we're not paying, if we had to, what we'd be paying for.
And I can send that to you.
Okay.
I mean, I can tell you that the budget for the SRO program is just under 3 million. I expect with cost of living, it will pop up just over 3 million in the next year or two. And I can break out, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about what you're getting, but to assign a cost to it, I'll have to get back to you.
Just like in terms of, I understand that you don't have control over like the calls that come in, but like in terms of time, I know you spend time in classes. Like, what are we talking about in terms of like human hours
Okay.
that Douglas gets?
So you want to exclude like training or?
I include that. I mean, that's reasonable. I'm just curious, like what the numbers are. And then the second question that I had is, we've heard a lot recently. In fact, we had educators come and talk to us about how we have some high needs kids, particularly around behavioral issues, and that we don't have enough counselors to deal with that. And my question is around trauma-informed practices, like what training you've had in trauma-informed practices or how you utilize them. And I'd love to hear that from the officers, if possible. Thanks.
So part of the ongoing training that we're doing is attending the classes that we can get to. Some of those are juvenile minds, the development of that. Some of them are trauma-informed practices as far as interviewing, as far as counseling, as far as talking to parents, as far as placement of kids when you're talking to them, whether we even interview them. Some kids we don't even interview or talk to because of where they're at mentally. We save that. We have specialty division cares when we have abuse and sex crimes going on, where we take that into account when we're talking to the kids, and they go straight there and talk to a psychologist rather than us. And we take that as the interview instead of us being involved in it. Part of the impact with the family and where that kid is at, we usually try to get that information before we can talk to them if we need to. We get that from counselors, from administrators. We find, okay, is this kid on IEP? What are they on it for? What's their background? Is this something where we're going to need to be doing a manifestation at the school? And if so, is this really the proper time for us to be talking, or are we going to look farther ahead? If we're doing a safety plan, does that come into play on this, and how is it going to work? So it's a total picture that we try to take into account, and a lot of that is based on the school's knowledge. Sometimes we bring knowledge to the table that they don't have, like family history at the house, domestic violence issues, those sort of things that the school doesn't have, but we do. And so we try to put the package together when we're working with the kids. That's the benefit of us in having that time, is we can get that together before we do something. We have that ability to get the information, and we have the ability to delay it out a little bit, so let's give us time to do this the right way. The national trainings that we go to, the Oregon School Resource Officers have a yearly training that we go to, have speakers from national speakers that come in and talk, and they cover a range of topics, and a lot of times it's about trauma with kids, because that's a lot of times what's causing the behavior. And that's what we usually deal with is behavior and actions, and what's the appropriate course of action for that.
I think for me, the most stuff we probably deal with the most is that initial reporting of some sort of sexual, whether it be an assault or contact of some sort, and it's that make them recite it the fewest amount of times, right? So if I get there to take that initial report, I get the minimum amount of facts I can. We don't want this person being re-victimized by having to go through this whole thing numerous times. Once I determine this needs to go to the next step, we reach out to our supervisor. We get that student into CARES Northwest, which is the forensic kid interviewing area. And they take that in-depth interview one time, recorded, to kind of keep that from being, re-victimization, if you will. So that's probably more common than other trauma-related stuff.
Is there any more questions on this thing? Ken, you want to make a comment? I
Well,
have a few questions.
You bet. And I do not have a question. I was just going to open up to the board to acknowledge that we have some administrators. So as you're asking questions, framing questions, thinking about questions, please don't hesitate. We can address our administrators, and we do have our student rep on the board as well that I'd love to hear from sometime tonight when it's appropriate.
That's my plan, to ask a few administrators up as well as the students if they're willing to get up. I'm with Stephanie on the numbers and how much time. I know you, from what I understand, it hasn't been tracked exactly. So I know you can't say I'm spending 10 hours this day or 2 hours this day or whatever, but estimates will be quite fine. I keep hearing personnel shortage. I should state I'm on the Citywide Budget Advisory Committee, and I have been for 3 years. So when the new union contract came in, I was there when there was the hot debate on the huge increases that were given so they could hire more. And then the next year I hear about they're applauding how many they hired. But now suddenly I'm hearing shortage again, and we supported that contract with the large increases. So you're saying there's a shortage, and I know there's environment out there that is keeping people from wanting to go into law enforcement. But are you also seeing morale problems that are keeping people from staying at Portland? Because I know we're giving very competitive wages at the city of Portland.
Yeah, I'm not sure that wage is the issue of getting into law enforcement right now. I think there's the national narrative around law enforcement. I also think there's a new generational viewpoint of careers and what that looks like. What I will tell you is some basic numbers. I think right now our vacancies are at 90 of 950 authorized strength, and we're at 90. February and March will be big retirement months. The Bureau is anticipating somewhere between 30 and 40 members leaving. Through that time, I think we have like maybe 35 people getting off probation. One of the challenges, of course, is most people don't actually understand that hiring a you can hire a police officer today, they don't count for a year and a half. Before they actually count as a staffing person. So it's not like we can say we're 90, we'll just go on a big hiring spree and we'll be fine in a month. We are having challenges getting people in the door just like everybody else is across the country. So I don't anticipate our staffing levels really getting better. I don't know how long, for a while. It'll be a while before they get better. I would say there is a morale impact. I'm going to let them speak to morale a little bit because I'm so far removed that if I speak from the position of how patrol officers are feeling, it would not be genuine or genuous because I'm not a patrol officer. But But the one thing I will tell you is that, and I don't, and I will say this in understanding that a lot of people are experiencing it. I bet if I ask all the people in the back of the room, they would say the same thing. Do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. And that's kind of been the mantra, within the public service sector for a long time. And the police bureau has made cuts and cuts and cuts. And there probably was stuff that, 10 years ago was extra and it was good to get rid of that. But it's, sitting where I'm sitting, there are fewer police officers working patrol today than there were when I was hired 25 years ago. And we've probably increased our 150,000. I mean, Portland's probably increased by about 150,000 over that same time. So there is, I would say there is probably at least that work piece that's having an impact on patrol officers, because the amount of work they're expected to do is substantially more. Morale-wise, I'll let you guys answer the morale question.
I think people are doing the best with what they have. There's a lot of hours, it's a lot of work, you don't have enough officers. You guys keep asking about a percentage of hours that we're out here, that we work. I'm at David Douglas maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, maybe right now, because of the shortage. And that's very frustrating for me. This is my community, this is where I want to be, and I can't be here because I'm at one of the other schools, or I'm working patrol, or I'm somewhere else. And so we have no time in the schools. If I'm working the schools, Chris is on patrol. So he's not here. If Chris is working the school, I'm on patrol. And if one of us is working the school, that means the Franklin guy is probably on patrol too. So now I'm covering Franklin also. And so we're all over, and we get no time here. And that's just very frustrating, and it's very hard because we can't do our job with fidelity. We can't be here and do what we need to do. Putting the contract in place and having us back out, we're here 38 out of the 40 hours a week. We'll have court time occasionally, but otherwise we're here full time at our schools, not at other schools, at our own schools. And that's what we used to do. And that give us time to go talk to kids and teach classes, doing student fairs, doing all of the things that we did that helped us build the community. And the patrol officers are the same. They are going call to call to call. They don't have time to do follow-up. They don't have time to eat lunch sometimes. And so they're just frustrated because they're so busy. But command staff is doing what they can, and officers are covering each other. So I don't think morale's bad. It's just, they're just working really hard.
And I can equate with that. Our staff does the same thing. So we have had to do a lot with less. So we, in our schools as well. I have to tell you, I was the one who objected to paying for this year, because sitting on the citywide budget committee, I specifically asked for SROs funded for our schools for this fiscal year, and I was told yes. So that I was the first one to object loudly to paying anything. I'm not against an IGA, okay? That I don't have a problem with that. We do have to determine whether we fiscally can pay. I personally support the SRO program. I feel it's a very positive program. I've been on the school board for 28 years. I've never heard a negative thing about the program here. So, but financially, some of the numbers you were knocking around, that's a teacher and a half. And we already might have to be cutting teachers if the state doesn't come up with money. So much depends on the state. So, because we're limited also. We don't have tax revenue coming in that the city has coming in and stuff. So, but we're kind of doing the workshop just so people can ask questions, and some newer members who, especially the ones that haven't had high schoolers, wanted to know more about the program. So we thought it would be great to have you here, and I guess I have to think more about the city budget and where it's going, because You'll probably see me if you're at the work sessions, because I'll be there too come March, asking similar questions probably. So
Maybe you can help them find some money in a hidden drawer somewhere.
I find on occasion I can be a little influential over there.
The
So
one thing I'll say about the financial piece of this, and when I talked to the superintendent, as far as specifically the ask for this current fiscal year, I realized that was probably it wasn't even an ask. I wasn't actually making an ask. I was just trying to say this was basically equal to what we were talking to PPS about. Really and ultimately, I am the lowest person on the totem pole when it comes to the negotiation of any of the financial piece of this. That's when my boss sits at the table. Really, I wanted to have a conversation about the IGA, and I think that I still believe that's the most important part. I don't know. I'll just be frank. I have no idea where we're gonna be at the end of this fiscal year. I have no idea of what the police bureau is going to look like, where they're going to do their budget cuts, because they're asking for a budget cut this year, so I have no idea what that looks like. But what I do know is that if we're going to continue operating, that we need to do it with the best practice of having that operation in a written agreement. And then it is really ultimately up to my boss and my boss's boss, the chief, to decide is compensation important, and what does that look like, and how to negotiate it. But for me, the important piece is getting that IGA, getting the rest of that IGA, worked out, because there are pieces in here that you may not agree with, or that may not apply to you, or that you want to see done differently. I'll address the time, regardless of what the time is that they're spending here now, which would be a total. It will be much of a guess. The IGA makes it so that they are spending 90% of their free time in their schools. And when I say free time, I don't mean that they're free. I just mean that doesn't include if they take a vacation day or if they have training. Those are outside of that 90%. But 90% of their available work time is spent in the schools. And that was put in the IGA, and we did it on purpose because we value the piece of the relationship piece and all the aspects of SROs that are outside of the law enforcement function. That's what we value, and they can't do that appropriately unless they have enough time. That's, Steve is saying, he doesn't get to do those things nearly as often or at all, some of them, because he doesn't have the time. That would be, the one thing that I would want to kind of work towards. And then I'll also say we've been having some conversations, because I know it's probably everybody here is aware that PPS is also having their school board meeting tonight, about having all the school districts sit at a table together and having a larger conversation with all the school districts, which I support, and I'm hoping that we can make that happen at some point in time. And when I say the school districts, I mean specifically what was told to me is having the superintendents and the board chairs sit at a meeting from all the districts, so that we could have a conversation about where this was going and what everybody and how it was going to look. And hindsight being 20/20, maybe it should have started there, but that's what hindsight is. So.
Well, just so you know, some of us board chairs have already met on the issue just to get a feel about it.
Some of the board members have too. And I would just say, that's some of my questions were about budget, because, your jurisdiction is citywide, and ours, we really have to take care of the kids and the families and the community that live here in David Douglas, and we're so much smaller than Portland Public, right? And so, that we share 10 officers with a huge district to the west, and we're so tiny, and Park Rose, I think a larger conversation is warranted about how resources are distributed or not. And I do understand the history of this, like with the change in ballot measure 5 in school funding, and how that is why, Portland Public ended up having the city take over there. I mean, there was a lot that went into that, and David Douglas at the time benefited, right? From that? In some
Actually,
ways?
we didn't get SROs till quite a bit after Portland Public.
Okay. Well, they got theirs first, but we did benefit from the change in funding, right?
Yeah.
But there are questions, I think, about district size and how much we'll get for the money, because we're responsible for our jurisdiction's funding.
So just a little bit on that so that everybody has an idea, because I was the one that put that together. Ultimately what I did was I took the cost of running the SRO program. There are 12 SROs. PPS has 9. You guys have 2. Park Rose has 1. So it equated to like 75%, 16%, and 8%, 16 something, 8 something, according to the number of officers. And then I just took the whole thing and did it by percentage. And then really ultimately what it was something close to 50%, so that it was a 50-50. So the city was paying 50% and we were asking the school district for 50%. So it was a fairly basic concept around how we came to the dollar amount. I mean, that's how we came to it. That was specifically, I mean, we had lots of conversations with PPS around the dollar amount, but we weren't anywhere near that in Park Rose, or David Douglas, or Park Rose. I mean, there are a lot of things, and like I said, hindsight being 2020, it probably would have been better to start having conversations with everyone. Although, I wasn't in the unit at that time, but I'm one person, and there's a lot. There's a lot of work, and I'll tell you, it's been a lot of work just kind of trying to deal with one school system. So I can't imagine having 3. Now, if we can get them all at the table together, that might be manageable, but it is a ton of work. So.
Well, you'll find we're easier to deal with. Sometimes we hold the hard line, but we're easier to deal with than PPS. Yes. But Bryce had a question, I believe.
Well, and this maybe change it up a little bit from finance and budgets and stuff. I think earlier we were talking about morale, and maybe that was more just directly to the 2 officers. So do you feel respected in our schools?
Absolutely.
By the students?
Absolutely.
And by the administration? And
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and I got a question. If you were, I know you said that, well, I won't say what I think you said. Anyway, if you had to give a command to a student, could you tell us kind of like what a command might be that you would expect compliance?
Well, it's kind of a graduated scale, right? And it all depends on what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
If I'm already involved in this, we've probably skipped a number of steps between teacher, campus monitor, probably dean, admin of some sort. And if I'm responding to this thing, something has gone beyond that capability.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's an introduction, right? Even on the street, outside of getting out of a police car on a big hot scene, it's, hey, how you doing today? I'm Officer Colt, Portland Police Bureau. This is why I'm here. I've been called here because of this. I need you to come over here and talk to me real quick. No, you're going to come over here and talk to me real quick. And it gradually, you're there because of a reason. There's a probable cause that exists. The control of that situation comes to me, and that's where, the trust is that we're going to maintain that control, if you will. So it graduates up from that introduction to getting more firm, to giving more direct commands, to giving more, no, I need you to come over here and, put your hands on the wall, do it now, right? And probably not that nice, but it's going to graduate that way until ultimately, if we're not getting to where we need to be, and this is a dangerous situation, it may go to hands being put on somebody. But that's a long process. It's in totality, right? It may stop at the, hey, buddy, I'm Officer Culp. I've been called here because of this. We're going to have a conversation about this. And it may stop there. And that's the bulk of it, I think. A lot of times there's some pushback against teachers and administrators. There's a comfort level there, and then just once this uniform is inflicted into whatever this is we're dealing with, that seems to be a calming factor, or maybe not calming, but it gets everybody to comply, right? It's that mere presence aspect of the whole thing, and that's the bulk of it. Very rarely does it go beyond that. Again, the couple of arrests that I made out here, there's been an admin there. There's been, the first one, a long conversation, right? We've talked our way through this thing, and it ultimately ends in somebody being arrested and handcuffed. But with that, I think we'll both admit our jobs aren't here to embarrass or punish. I have a very policy-driven way of doing things. So even for the example here on this campus, we made the arrest in a closed office, right? We handcuffed in the front. We used a jacket. We sat in the office that way for a period of time until the passing was over and the halls were clear. Once the halls were clear, we had a campus monitor check to make sure there was nobody around. Once that happened, we walked out the front door of the police car, in the police car, and away we went. It's not a spectacle, right? We're not here to get the school riled up because somebody got arrested either. Probably nobody in the school other than the folks dealing with it even knew it happened, right? A lot of it's the mere presence. It's the command presence. It's being very matter of fact and honest with the person and saying, this is what's going to happen. You know, I wish we didn't have to do it this way, but this is where we've gotten because of, you know, decisions that you made, acts that you did. This is where we're here, and this is what's going to happen, and not kind of wavering from that once you get to that point.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I guess I just wanted to say thanks for, like you say, the graduated step by step and having the patience and the good-sightedness to, you know, to know that if you start out immediately putting your hands on somebody, it's probably not going to be the right reaction. But so I just wanted to say that it sounds to me like the things that you do are well thought out. You know, obviously we've all seen the circumstances where police aren't respected and they are not, when they give a command, maybe it's even, you know, later in life after an individual's finished high school and now they're on to other things in life. And I think the things that they learn here by the things that you're doing and the way you're doing it, then gives them the ability to respect you later in life. And so anyway, I appreciate SROs and appreciate what you're doing.
It's not a personal issue.
No.
Right? We take it personally because these are
You're professionals.
But we don't go into this thing mad at this person. I'm not here to cuss you out. It's that thing, if you drop the F word too soon in your argument, you've kind of lost the argument, right? So you work your way up to that. It's not
But
a
you
person.
don't work your way up to that.
No, ma'am. I don't know how you say it. It's my whole thing. Hey, listen, man, nobody's mad at you. It's just part of the game. It's just part of the process, right? And it's not that we'll go into all these things. They're kids, first of all. Outside of this being very rare, very dangerous situation, there's some sort of a weapon involved or somebody's already been badly injured in something. Outside of those very, very rare incidents, they're kids, right? A lot of the ones that we deal with, there's probably something else on board as well. There may be some drug or alcohol experimentation that you take into consideration. And we're the professionals. They can act out and they can say things to us and they can be out of control with their verbiage or however, you know, their mannerisms. But we're the ones that have been doing this a long time, and we don't buy into that. I don't let their actions dictate my response, right? I try to stay as calm as possible, use as little force, if any, as possible, and have whatever they're doing dictate that. And then it always seems to work itself out.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
Sense?
Okay.
Yep.
We
Yeah, you
do
do.
have those issues in other schools. I'd say we are blessed to be here. We know
Absolutely.
that. Every other SRO knows that and is waiting for us to leave. So a big part of that is you guys giving them the ability to control their schools, have structure, have rules in place, enforce those rules. That teaches the kids that you need to respect authority, that if you don't follow the rules, there's a consequence that goes with it. It's life.
Yeah.
If you're out on the street, you're at a job, you do something that you're not supposed to, there's a consequence that goes with it. They need to learn that. They can learn it in David Douglas schools. These are the rules, these are the consequences. You give them the ability to enforce it. So when they get past that point and we have to come in, there's already an expectation of doing it. But most of the time when we go deal with the kids, they've already got that structure in place. Some of the other schools we go to do not have that.
Yeah.
We go in and we have issues just walking down the hallway going to the office. We have issues when we're in there trying to deal with kids because there is no respect for authority. There's no expectation that you're going to follow the rules. You just do what you want to do. And it's a totally different battle. So maintaining what you guys have maintained out here for years and letting David Douglas run the way it does has made a huge difference from what we've seen.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions? Okay, just two things for me. Number one, when you're collecting data, could you give us also get the cost of the year, the various trainings? But I just want it lumped up. How much do you pay for training per SRO? I'm a data wonk, so like all the information, especially when it comes to money. And the other thing is, just because I want to give you a heads up on your program, some of the objection that I hear from other school board members, not these ones here, but other school board members, is the issue that we pay for police, and they should be out here. And as Ken likes to say, David Douglas High School is a small community. In fact, most communities of 3,000 would probably have more than 2 police officers. So we have a community out here where East Portland is 28% of the city's population. So there is a need for police officers out here and adequate policing out here. But I really appreciate your time here, and if there's no more questions, one more? Okay.
I just wondered, as you've discussed the shortages, can a young person who's interested in law enforcement pursue that specifically to become an SRO, or is the process set up that they have to become, a general police officer first, and then after a certain amount of time, could somebody look at that and say, you know what, I really think this is important. I want to pursue this if I get specifically to do this?
So everybody starts out as a general police officer, and you can't move straight into any specialty unit within the police bureau. Mm-hmm. And I think you can come into the police bureau with an interest. I mean, I'll just say, you can have an interest in doing something, although a little bit more challenging in the police bureau today. One of the draws in the police bureau in the past has been the diversity of the different things that you can do outside of just patrol. And so people might come in thinking they want to do one thing and then find out that they end up on a completely different career path. I mean, I intended to be a detective, and I'm not a detective, and now I'm a captain. So I ended up on a completely different career path than what I thought I was going to when I came in. But you do have to pass probation and be a police officer first before you can do anything else.
Is there a length of time that you have to be a police officer before you can pursue a specialty area?
It depends on the specialty unit. Some of them will require a minimum amount of time in patrol. A lot of times the requirement is simply that they're off probation, which is 1.5 years. But depending on some of the units may require 3 years, or but for the most part, I think most of them are simply just off probation. And although I will tell you, having time on sometimes gives you a leg up against your competition to get into those specialty units, which can be a challenge because a lot of people are. Depending on what unit you're talking about, you can get a high level of interest for just one position. So,
okay, thank you.
Okay, one more.
You were asking about young people. Just as a heads up, we have a lot of David Douglas students that are on our cadet program, and that's high school age to early college age kids that are interested in law enforcement or in a career field in civil service somewhere. We get them in, put them through a cadet academy, and they get to go on ride-alongs with officers. You'll see them, a lot of times our high school kids, you'll see them at the parades, you'll see them in a police car at our schools, at the year-end community fairs, handing out stickers, letting the kids climb through the police cars. And we've had a very good turnout of David Douglas kids through there. I think we have 7 David Douglas kids out of our 40 right now going through the cadet program that we just started. The academy's going right now, but I think 7 of the 40 are just David Douglas. The rest are from Vancouver, Oregon City, Portland, Beaverton, all across the rest of the area, and almost a third of them are David Douglas. So,
Stephanie, one more.
Just something that these guys are so tired of me hearing about, like community input and involvement. I really do appreciate the opportunity for you all to come here, and I see your faces. You're at board meetings sometimes. And I appreciate your time and coming here answering questions. I look forward to seeing the numbers and having conversations with other districts. I do want to ensure that as we go through this process that we also have opportunities to engage parents, to engage youth, to engage community members, the groups that we work with that are contracted, other staffers besides admin. I think that's really important that we hear from everyone, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to share the work that you do, and thank you for it.
Thank you. Just real quick on that, if you are doing your community outreach to whichever one of those groups and you would like us to be in the room for that, we are more than happy to do that. Either myself, I'm going to volunteer them because I can because they work for me, but they would volunteer themselves. So if those opportunities come up and you would like us there, please let us know.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'll let you go. Unless
Yeah, so I think you're going to transition here and ask some questions from others.
Yeah.
But before she lets you go, before we say a final thank you, one I'd want to ask, as I'm afraid maybe I'm getting ahead of Frida, if maybe you could wait. Our meeting's still going, and our administrators are probably going to come up and say a few words. Our students, and just maybe for you to hear that one and/or to comment on that might be beneficial. But really, the reason I interrupt you, and I apologize, Frida, is I just wanted to thank you as well, Captain Hager. You've been very gracious with your time, responsive. Every phone call, so the board knows she's been right there. Every email right there, and I can't stay. So for you, you guys can pay me later. But Chris and Steve are part of our community. We believe in relationships, and they embody that. I'm sure you'll hear that in a minute from our administrators. But to thank them for their service in education. Our main function is educating kids. But you've heard me say many, many times, we can't do that if our students aren't safe. So that goes hand in hand. What I really appreciate about Steve and Chris is that safe piece they get, but they also understand we're here to educate kids, and they are kids, and kids make mistakes, and adults make mistakes. And that education piece and learning piece, they embody that, and I think we're safer because of it. I think our community's safer because of it, and it just makes a difference. I heard time and time again, and I just want to reframe it, our school is a microcosm of our community. If it's happening in our community, there's pieces of it in our school. That's just reality. We don't like to talk about that sometimes, but it's true. So if we think about our community and what's going on, and this is every school, every community, some of that exists. So to have supports in the idea of resource, school resource, that's what I see them at. We didn't even get into topics about lost children. A student gets off a bus, wrong bus stop. The first call we make is to our SROs that, boom, are there and on it and can be brought out. And yes, we can call 911 and others, but when we know individuals and have that relationship, when I have a personal cell phone to both these individuals and all of our cabinet, that's helpful. We didn't talk about issues that come up from other departments. We hear about something in Salem that's connected to our district, and for us to call and try to connect to that, we get nowhere. But when we go to these two gentlemen and say, hey, can you help us with that? There's a lot that happens, and Captain Hager talked about this, a lot we don't talk about, we don't publicize, but it's just happening behind the scenes daily. So I also want to acknowledge for the board that, and I think this is fair to acknowledge, there are individuals in our community that don't feel safer with police. And as a superintendent, I serve a community, I have to own that. What I want to do is have conversations, and how do we bridge that? How do we develop the relationships and come to an understanding of that safety piece and that education piece. I don't want to dismiss that. I want to make sure that there's open conversations, which I think our entire board wants to have. But ultimately, I want the board to hear, and I know I've said it before, is I support our SROs. I think they're essential to what we do, and I think they provide a service that is beneficial to our community. But with that said, I just want to say thank you guys very much.
Thank you. I'm wondering if administrators don't mind if I have the students come first, if you'd like to say a few things about SROs. I want to give you an opportunity, freely speak without, you don't have to, any of the students here, or you want to let I'm open for any of you to come up and speak, just to get your input and your take. Some of the board members wanted it. If we do this at a formal board meeting, we'll be more formal about it. But this is kind of informal, so.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say a couple things. Like, I've had personal experience with Officer Mortonville, especially. He was actually one of my closest friends' neighbors, and so I felt like I already had a sort of connection, even if he didn't feel like he did with me. I definitely see him as someone other than, like, say, a teacher or someone that works like with the school, as someone I can go to just ask questions, even just talk about day-to-day life with, as a authority figure and someone that would be willing to just talk to me about anything. And so I do feel like a lot of kids, my peers here at David Douglas, do have that type of connection with both of the officers, and I feel like we're really grateful to have that because of the stories we hear from other schools, especially like Parham Public Schools, and they have a completely different dynamic between the students and SROs that come in. And I feel like we are so grateful for the opportunity to have had the connections made between the students and them. And we even went as far as talking about it in both of our student council classes. And a lot of the students in our class were kind of a skewed data, you could say, because a lot of the students in there are high achieving students, very good grades, taking advanced classes, very on the straight and narrow. So we don't really have any run-ins with like having to go to administration for being in trouble of any sort. The only type of administration contact we have is when, you guys come to us and talk to us about just what's the day like in Douglas and stuff like that. But even hearing from them, they do feel that they feel safer having an officer at school, because one of the big things that we talked about was how officers react to crimes between students. Like, one of my friends, her phone was stolen by a student at school, and the SROs took care of it, and she didn't want to press charges or anything, and she just got her phone back, and the kid had consequences with administration instead of the law. And she felt more secure, my friend felt more secure having that type of consequences for the student rather than just calling the police on them and having them be arrested and potentially charged with theft and having to go to court, because to her it wasn't that big of a deal. And so one of the things that we really appreciate with having the connections is when you call 911, a lot of the times officers just go to the extreme worst case scenario, just like if you were to go to the emergency room for a injury that you had, they would go worst case scenario. And with having those type of connections with the two officers that we do have, it's not always worst case scenario you're looked at as a criminal automatically because 911 was called for something that you were involved in. And so I really do think that they bring so much to the students here and the community, not just students, staff, and administration. I truly believe that they are a very big role in helping us feel safe at school, especially being such a big school.
Hi, my name is Jared Ketz. I'm acquainted with most of you, but that's who I am. I am also in student council. I am the junior class president. And actually, I'm sure Elena talked about this, but we had a project in student council where we surveyed students on whatever we wanted, one thing that we felt passionate about. And with the knowledge that this was coming up, I surveyed students on the question, how do you feel about SROs in our school? Of course, I elaborated and explained what SROs are because most people are like, huh? So the way I phrased the question is, if you were the student I was asking, I'd be like, how do you feel about SROs in our school? And if you don't know, SROs are school resource officers, or in other words, the police officers that are that you normally see at our school on a regular basis. It was a 1 through 10 question. So 10 would be like, oh, I love them here. I want them to stay. They make me feel safe. I do not want them to leave. 1 is they make me feel unsafe. I think they are negatively impacting our school community, and I do want them to leave. And 5 ranged from I didn't know they existed. I feel indifferent, like if they left today or stayed, it would not matter to me whatsoever. And a lot of, and that's how I phrased the question. And the most prominent answer was 5, and it was, most people were like, they felt irrelevant about it, and they didn't really know what the SROs did. They didn't really care one way or the other if SROs stayed or went. And that's what I got from talking to students. But of course, I only surveyed 100 students, and there's 3,000 at David Douglas. And so that was a part of it. One of my other concerns was like, I love that, like the ones that we have right now, I think they are awesome. What concerns me is that, like, if this is going to continue on, what happens like when they are gone, or if something happens to them right now, like the people who are going to replace them, how am I ensured that the next people have like the right training to work, like the specifically right training, like implicit bias, like specifically with students and in that community, because that's really important, that the students in my school, in our school, are going to be safe from that 100%, that there's going to be no fault, no mistakes made, and the mistakes, of course, aren't, police officers wouldn't think about the mistakes, they would just happen. And that's one of my concerns. As for the specific ones, I love them, but I'm concerned about the future. Also, I have the impression that we're having this conversation because it's going to cost a lot of money financially. If it didn't, it wouldn't be that as much big of a deal. And so obviously one of my other big concerns is because students have expressed they don't feel greatly one way or the other about the SROs, the money that would be used for them could be used for counselors, specifically for like mental health issues, for more students to go to, or of course teachers, and the money would be put to better use in our community. And so that's some of the thoughts that we have.
You brought up a couple of good points. If we do look at an IGA, what we want to have in it. So
I do not know what IGA is. I'm
it's
sorry.
An intergovernmental agreement. We do them quite often with the city, with their different bureaus like parks and several of the bureaus. It's just something two public entities will do to agree upon what they're going to be working with. Okay. And so they each know what they're supposed to do. Sorry, we have a habit of using initials. Okay. Did anyone have any questions of the students? Go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I just have a couple. Okay, so Lena, I have a couple for both of you actually. So for Alina, I'm curious, you had talked a little bit about the conversation that you had with, I'm assuming was it like just the ASB student council and then each of the class councils? Or my question is how many students was that and when was that conversation?
So how our class is split up right now, it'll change next year, but right now we have all of the senior class, which is a senior class council and ASB members in one period, and then another period we have all of the rest of the council members, junior through freshman. And so we call them the lower classmen. They're a bigger group, and we have about 25-ish in the senior class, and then about 30-ish in the lower classmen class. And so that is kind of how it's split up. But next year it will be split up with juniors and seniors in one class, and then freshmen and sophomores in the other class.
And where will the ASB be?
In the junior and senior class.
Okay. And when were these conversations?
They were
Beginning of the month?
Yes, after we got back from winter break.
Okay, cool. And then I thought that you had a really good point about the demographics of student council and just kind of your own experiences and the likelihood of interactions that you would be positive. And I'm curious, in agreement with Stephanie that for me it is really important. I really appreciate you both being here. It's important for me to hear from as many students as possible, and I'm curious what your recommendations are to hear from some of the other students who aren't in student council. I'm sure you all think through, in general, recruitment for student council and just kind of what you would recommend for us to hear from some of those other student populations.
So what we do to reach out to the people that aren't really, a lot of students find student council sometimes not approachable, kind of secluded. So one thing that we try to do as much as we can is send out surveys in the email and really utilize our social media, not only our official accounts, but our personal accounts also. So I know the junior class actually today, they are planning prom. It's coming up very soon, and they don't really have a theme picked out yet. And so most of the students in junior class sent out a survey on their personal social medias because that's so big in our community nowadays, especially in teenagers and us being young and wanting to hide behind our screens instead of talking face to face, which was one thing that Ms. Kolgel, one of the guidelines in our final was you can't use social media or a survey. You have to talk to your peers face to face, have a real conversation with them, introduce yourself, and tell them why you're asking this question. And so one of the things that we really we're working on it, but it's a struggle, is those connections between not only administration and student council, but student council and student population, because we are 60-ish kids out of a 3,000 kid school. And so we do a lot of the questions that we do ask and have to come up with answers for. We try to ask as many kids as we can because we know we are kind of a skewed population within our little student council bubble.
Thanks. And then, Jared, similar question. When did you do your survey?
I did it so I did it combining, last week was finals. I did it we got there on Tuesday. I did Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, about the Tuesday of finals and the end of the week before.
Okay, cool. And then one final question. If you were to take your own survey, would you be a 5? Where would you be on the scale? I'm just curious.
I would be in 2 places. I would be, concerning our specific SROs, I would be at like an 8. Concerning SROs in general, I would probably be like a 5, just because of the concerns that I talked about, and how also when I surveyed people who were on the higher spectrum, they said like they voted higher in, but not passionately. People who voted like very much lower on the spectrum were very firm in their vote, not vote, but like, yeah, vote.
Answer.
Yeah, in their answer. They were very firm in their answer, and there was a couple students who talked about how like police officers did make them very uncomfortable in school and did put them on alert in school. And so there was that as well.
Okay. Stephanie, I guess any other questions or comments?
Curious, when you did your survey, was there any intentionality in terms of trying to get a more diverse sampling? In other words, in terms of gender, age, kids who were involved in student activities versus the kids who weren't. Was there any thought and intention behind that, or was it just purely random, whoever you ran into in the hall?
It was not 100% focused on that. If I had more time and it was better, I would have done it like that. But I wasn't as efficient as I was doing it. But one of where I did most of the surveying was I tried to do it during lunchtime, because that was a time that it was mixed between everyone, and I tried to go to different groups to create that diversity in the survey. But it was towards juniors, so there's also that.
And then, the officers mentioned a cadet program. I'm wondering, just in your own experience, do you feel that most students are aware of that program? And do you yourselves, have you seen people who participate in that program?
I am aware of that program specifically because I do like announcements in the morning. And like that's like one of the announcements that I say once in a while. I hope people are aware, because I hope people are listening to me. I don't think I have specifically been like heard someone talk about it.
Okay.
The only person I know in that program personally goes to another school. So,
okay.
But yeah, Alina can say something on that.
So one thing that I was kind of advocating for with Ms. Kogel a little bit was how aware our students are of the type of classes that we do offer. So when I remember forecasting as, a freshman or an 8th grader going into freshman year, I had no idea what any classes were. The names of classes just didn't give any description. And yes, we did have a handbook describing the course, but it was not as in-depth as I would have liked it to be. And one thing that we started doing was, I noticed it in student council and in entrepreneurship class, is taking video during class to be shown. I think Ms. Kogel said to the upcoming freshmen of a lot of the electives that we do offer, and what it's like to be in the classroom, not just what the course looks like on paper. Mm-hmm. And so I was actually pretty excited to hear that we're doing something that I feel like a lot of students would appreciate, because I know I would have appreciated it back when I was a 8th grader. And then I think a lot of students don't really know about the cadet program because it's not on campus. It's on East Campus. And so I've never been to that area of the school, but I have heard of very few and far between students that are really interested in it, and they do take the cadet class every once in a while. Just someone I hear like walking down the hallway, oh, what class do you have? I have cadet on the East Campus, so I have to go right now. It's because it's a little bit of a walk, but I think one of the problems is we don't really have a good resource of what each course offers and what each course entails other than the handbook. But we do have the video coming, which is exciting.
Thank you.
Okay. Ken?
I do not have a question. I just want to recognize these two leaders and thank them for their voice and what they do every day. I've had the opportunity to be at a number of different meetings with them. In fact, I can't go to a meeting that Jared's not at. But Alina as well, and I had the opportunity to see them both speak to our elected officials about education, about needs, about support, and just every time I see them interact and represent David Douglas and their school, I'm always impressed. So thank you. And the one thing that really stands out to me is we talked about themes. Alina's presented it before about just being kind, how we treat each other, how we connect with each other, and their intentionality to reach out and get voice from others. Their understanding that this elected position, there's some that might not have that connection, and really going out of their way to build voice, I just think is tremendous. So thank you so much for your leadership in that. I think it makes a difference.
And thank you for willing to get up and talk to us. We're hitting close to the deadline. Do the administrators mind staying just a little extra? So if there's any questions of administrators, we could get them. Are you guys okay? Of course, I'm asking, so you're going to say okay, right? You guys okay with a few extra minutes? I don't know. Who do you think? I'll let you guys get down so they can come up so we can kind of get any questions. I kind of like input from middle, high, elementary, because it sounds like they're all over the district. So you guys can choose.
Come on up. Amy, please, and Kate, are you going to come up? Whoever would like to come up for elementary. By the way, thank you up front. Again, this workshop I asked them, but they did not prepare a presentation.
I don't want preparation.
That was not the ask at all here. So they're really just going to share their thoughts.
Yeah. No, this is very informal and just your thoughts and your feelings rather than some canned performance.
Well, it's not canned, but I did write down some notes. Doug Pease, I'm at Floyd Light, the principal there. The one thing that I just want to emphasize some of the things that were said by all parties. It really is resource officers, not law enforcement, for the most part. I've really found Captain Hagar, is that right? Hagar talked about Cheryl. I don't remember her last name, as being a counselor that works with youth to do prevention. I see Cheryl at Floyd Light often, working with our students. I know that when our SROs are not available, and I do have to call non-emergency, hardly ever call 911, I'll have patrol officers come, and they're like really reluctant. It's interesting. They're like, why don't you talk to your SRO? And I said, I tried to call our SRO. They're like, okay, well, I'll look at this, but then I'm going to pass it on. You know that. And that is universal. I know that the patrol officers really look up to our SROs. They really are specially trained, and the officers know that. Just yesterday, I'm not sure why Officer Morinville was working on a Monday, but he was. And I asked him, should this be a report that was made? And I described the situation, and he said no. So, I mean, that headed off a call. I do know that sometimes I'm agitated, and both Officer Culp and Officer Morinville are like, calm down. And they truly are professional. Just another quick anecdote. About 2 months ago, I got a call in the middle of the night. You might have heard of, what's that called? Oregon? Safe Oregon, thank you. And of course, the SROs aren't on duty, and it was a serious enough call that patrol officers went middle of the night to the family's house. And I kind of got a report in the morning, and I immediately called Officer Morinville, and he went right over there in the morning and just followed up on that situation. Again, Officer Morinville knew what to do, and reassured the family, got me talking to the family, and that's just one anecdote from a couple of months ago. So those are some thoughts that I wrote down.
Hi, I'm Amy Straw. I'm principal at Fur Ridge. I did not write down notes. But so I was a teacher at the high school before I became a district administrator, and then got the opportunity to be the administrator at Fur Ridge, and I've gotten to work a lot with Officer Steve. One of which I would say the importance of an SRO is my background is special ed, and hearing him say IEP, manifest, that doesn't happen with patrol officers. You know, so like he knows even if it's a suspension and we bring him in, he'll be like, is this kid on an IEP? Like, have you done, like, and reminding, you know, other staff. So beyond that, I've had the opportunity of the 2 incidences where the kids were arrested last year. It was actually the same kid, once at the high school and once in my building. My particular incident was with Officer Culp, and it was done with such dignity for that student. You know, we knew the situation going in that it was possibly a weapon. We knew that we called him personally, he was 30 seconds away. I mean, from him coming into the building to being arrested was the longest 15 minutes of my life, but never once did the building feel unsafe, myself or our security guard. He also walked him out, like they said earlier, with complete dignity. The kid, you know, we waited till the building classes were enrolled or in session, you know, handcuffed in front over, you know, his jacket was over that. You know, it was probably one of the most like nerve-wracking, scariest moments, but not once did I feel unsafe. And nor did my building. They didn't, when I met with the staff later on, and I think Andy was there, like a lot of them didn't even know it happened because it was done so smoothly. And I would say I know that probably wouldn't have been the case. He also walked in knowing the student, knowing the family, and the family felt safe enough to call the cops, knowing that their son may or may not have a weapon on them. And so we knew like everything that happened before that. But beyond that incident, like we have kids that unfortunately send photos of themselves out to their boyfriends or girlfriends or that may or may not be, you know, fully dressed. That like we have our SROs come in and talk to the kids about the importance of like how that is, you know, going to impact their life 10 years from now. So there's a huge educational standpoint. We have a kid that continually drives without a license. And we have Steve came in and met with the family, met with the student just to talk about like if you get pulled over anywhere else, like this is the consequence. You know, we didn't want to cite them right there because we wanted, you know, to educate them. So we have an amazing opportunity with the SROs in our building.
Well, does this move? Oh, good, it does.
I'll also do one really quick thing. Sorry, and the kid that was arrested, he's back in our building and he's graduating hopefully in 26 days. So, you know, so he will complete high school.
Awesome.
So.
Awesome. Well, good evening. I'm Kate Barker. I'm the principal of Cherry Park Elementary. And 16 and a half years ago, I started it was 30 days on the job, and I got a call that there was a big fight at the back of Mill Park. And so we called 911, and it ended up being a stabbing. And Steve Morinville was there for me 16 years ago as a baby principal, and he is still with me 16 years later as my partner and as my community member. And I've had the immense pleasure of working with him within our community for the last 16 years. And I am forever grateful for him and others that have done everything from help protect in really scary situations. They have eased staff's minds and built up their confidence levels for safety drills. They have met with students that have had a difficulty with stealing, let's say, or just been in the hallways smiling and handing out stickers and giving high fives and really building up that positive relationship with the community. They've met with parents. They've supported parents. They've gone on safety calls to make sure that everybody's okay. They've been sounding boards of what should I do if a student brings in fill in the blank, or what should I do if I have a speeding parent that's putting our community in jeopardy? Could you please be just a presence to get people to slow down? The list can go on and on and on and on. But what I can say as a dedicated member of our community is that they are part of our community. And we are so fortunate, and our strength is behind with our partners. And with our resource officers, we are stronger. And I cannot say enough positive things of how they support our community and how they are critically important to be part of our community.
Good evening. My name's Erica Ganay. I'm the principal at Earl Boyles Elementary School. I thought about what I wanted to say, and there's a lot of things I can say, and how they supported. I remember our first year working as an administrative intern, we had 2 deaths, student deaths in our school at Gilbert Park. It shook our world. And I remember, Steve, that was the first time I met Officer Smiley, and I think he got us through some really tough times as a community, not just for staff, but our parents and our kids as well. And he was in it every day. He was there for the tree planting ceremony and the healing. And there's many, many stories I can tell you, but I want to tell you a story about a parent perspective, because I am a parent in this community. I'm a voting member. I live in this community. I have 2 beautiful daughters that both went through David Douglas. Very different girls. One on student council, very good person. They're both good people. My second daughter, very different from our first daughter, but beautiful. Different pathway. So when you talk about groups, I totally get it, because they lived in different worlds, and that's great. But our youngest, some choices she made were not always the best. So I remember a time where she made a choice, and I was the parent sitting across from Officer Smiley, and she was there with me. And I have to tell you, from a parent perspective, it would have been really different if I didn't have somebody who had the understanding of a child dealing with my child. So I tell you that from a personal perspective, because as a mom, for those of you who do send your children through school, you hope that if they ever make a poor choice, you have somebody there advocating for them too. So from that point of view, from a parent, they're very valuable in my sense. So thank you for taking the time to hear them and to learn about their roles, because they're a valued member of our community. Thank you.
I gotta turn this thing on. Any questions from anyone? I guess we're gonna let you go. We appreciate you staying and answering questions, because this was an informative thing for the whole board. And I'm sure we'll have a few of you back as we move forward. Okay, any other comments, questions? We're a little late.
Just, it was a great evening. I think we all learned a lot.
I hope
Thanks for putting it together.
That was the whole idea, is
participation.
for people to learn about the program. Myself, I've been around so long that I've known about it and what it does, but it's good for everyone to get the nitty-gritty on it. So anyway, we'll adjourn.